Okay, so let's start with a sort of new file. Just to go over one thing that I'm noticing is happening. And close that up, close that up. Sorry, I was working on this earlier and I should have cleaned it up, but I didn't. Okay, so if I'm looking for a tool in Illustrator, right, I'm always going to come over to here and it'll allow me to bring up different things. One thing I'm really never without is layers. You know, layers are a really important part of this process. You know, top, background, etc. So layers, super important. The other thing that I see people doing that is not correct and that I need you to correct today if you've done it, and you can put your name on the board so we make sure you correct it right, is that for at least one of these, it can be all of them, but for at least one you need to use a template. And that template is a TIFF file that you place. You don't open the TIFF in Illustrator, you don't cut and paste the TIFF into Illustrator, you place it there to work over it after you get it prepared in Photoshop. So if I'm going to place a template, I'm going to go to File Place. And from File Place, I'm going to go into my project folder. Wrong folder. And I have a to be placed folder. And so I can take that TIFF file. Now, I gave you two options. You could link and make it a template at the same time. Another way to do this is just to link it. I like to show you different ways because everybody likes something a little bit different. Then paste the object into your board. And then go ahead and double click on the name of the layer. Make sure it's called template. This will help tremendously. And then click off of it, but then go back and double click to open up the layer options. So there's my layer options right there. And once I put it on my layer options, I can turn my template layer on and I can tell it how much I want to dim my image. So let's go ahead and say 50%, and you'll see that it lightens it up and it makes it so that I can't draw on that. That's super important. If you accidentally have stuff drawn on here, let's do an example. So it could be something like this, although it might not even show up because it's something like that. So one great way of knowing, here's my template layer. It looks like there's nothing on it, but if I do a select all or a Command A, I can see that it's got the picture that I placed. How can I tell it's a picture? Anybody know? I can tell that it's a picture because you'll notice that when I click on just the image, it has an X through the box. Versus if I do a Command A or a Select All, you'll see that this shape, even though it has no line and no stroke, doesn't have an X through it. That's a shape. Now, I can delete this shape, or let's make it solid again, or I can move it. And lots of ways to move it. I could cut and paste it, but even easier than that, if you've got something on this template layer, make another layer, and with just that object selected, drag the color icon next to it down to the layer you want it to be in, and you'll see that it moved it. You can see it's still highlighted in blue, but because it's underneath, it moved it behind. And then you can click off it to deselect. So now this is on its own layer, and I can move it up to the top. Does that make sense? If I don't need something, if it's not serving me, I can always lock it and turn it off, and maybe I want to go back to it later. Maybe I don't. All right? So one of the questions that someone just asked was about the Pathfinder tool. And there are sort of a lot of different ways to do this, but I'm going to try to do a demonstration that Corinne will answer your question while at the same time showing you other things that this tool can do. So if we go into Pathfinder, which again is under Window, Pathfinder, you get this pretty cool tool. Now, for many of you, you will never or have never known, whoops, I got the wrong thing, Window, Where did my Pathfinder go? There we go. You have never or will never know a world without the Pathfinder tool. But not too long ago, maybe 8 to 10 years ago, this tool didn't even exist. And everything you did, you had to do by hand. Think about how incredibly difficult that is. Well, you might not have to think about it because you might be doing that now. And when I show this to you today, you go, oh my goodness. So let's say I have a bunch of shapes, and this is really good for the positive and negative stuff. Let's make ourselves a new layer. Pretty sophisticated naming going on this morning. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what this tool can do. So I'm going to take a series of shapes, and I'm going to overlap said series of shapes. And I'm going to overlap these series. So if I want to switch to a different shape, I can do something like this. And I'm going to go ahead and put this item here. Okay? Now, when I have a series of shapes and I want them to be cut out from one another, I can select that series of shapes, right? And I can tell it to do a whole bunch of different things. So this last option is called exclude. So it literally means anywhere that two things overlap one another, knock it out. So when I click on it, that's what it does. Right? Now, let's say that I want to have another shape inside of here. So let's zoom in a little. And let's just make it a simple kind of a shape. I'm going to use the rectangle tool again. And for this example, I'm going to use that trick that we talked about by snapping my Option key down before I click on my mouse. I can make a copy of something. And by snapping the Shift key down at the same time, I can line it up. So just Option, click, drag, Shift, snaps it in line with one another. So I've got those three shapes there. I'm going to group them together. So to do that, I'm just clicking and dragging around all of them. I can go up to Object Group. I can then take my Option key and it will move all of them together. I can hover out to the outside and shift it in another direction. I can pull and push this however I want to, so they can do something like that. All right. I then can take these objects and I can group those together. And this way, when I go to grab one part of it, it moves the whole thing at once. All right. So that makes a, let's say, more complicated object for me to work with. And one option would be I could layer it right on here. And I could tell it to be white. And I could tell it to be stroked by none. And then it would knock it out in white. Yeah? But then I might decide that I want to adjust some parts of it. So I could come in here and use that direct selection tool to grab these three objects, which grabs the objects. Then switch to my selection tool, which then gives me a bounding box. And I can pull it up to the top or down to the bottom and do different things with it here. So that's one solution, right, of how I can work with this. Now, I might want to have a solution where I actually make several of these and cut them out of different shapes. And so another option, so I'm going to Option drag a copy of this down here. And I'm going to kind of scale it up. Right? And another option would be, I might want this to actually just get cut out of something. So in order to get to that point, I want to make all of these shapes be one singular shape together. So you can see right now that they're just a series of rectangles overlapping each other. Can everybody see those bounding boxes? So there's also this little option right here which says unite, right? And it also says Option click to create a compound shape, right? So if I hold down my Option key and I click on here, this will put all the shapes together. If I don't click on it and I click on here, you'll notice that you just get this one isolated shape that we can now play around with and knock out of different areas. Right? So just different ways of looking at that tool. Now, another option is if I have something that is coming off the edge of my page. So let's say I have a series of circles that are breaking the edge of my page. Let's make them black so it's a little bit easier to see. And let's stroke them with none. All right. And I want these circles to be cut off directly on the edge of my page. A really quick way to do this is to simply take the rectangular tool and pull it down on the side of your page like this. Hold down your Shift key to grab both of those objects, and then look at my options. If I asked you which of these options do you think would cut that circle off so that only this inside part showed up, which would you choose? Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Number 4. Now, notice in number 4, it's cutting out, it's excluding anywhere they overlap. So you're close, but I want to cut this off. Is there another guess?
Number 2.
Number 2. So now, if I click on number 2, voila. Pretty easy, right? And then this now is its own little shape that can go on the edge. Now I can do this over and over again, or I can take this one shape if I know I'm using the same thing again, and I can rotate it, and I can put it where I want it on the edge of my page, and I can shift select it. All right? Now, the other thing that people will run into that might be something a bit more complex is that we might want to have something that just gets cut off on an edge. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I might want this circle to be filled with a series of lines. All right? So a really easy way to do this is to go ahead and grab this tool here, and let's put this on its own layer to make this a little bit easier. So I'm going to go back up to my layers palette. I'm going to go to new layer, and I'm going to call it lined circle. I like to use upper lower so that I can find things a little bit easier. And again, I'm going to use that trick I just showed you. I'm going to take this highlighted item is highlighted, color is highlighted, drag it up to there. You'll now see it's blue. It lives on this layer here. So we'll go ahead and turn these layers off and lock them so that we don't accidentally work on them. And now I'm going to work just on this circle. So I'm going to take a series of lines, and I'm going to make them longer than my shape, and I'm going to make them black, and I'm going to make them pretty thick. So I just made a line. Everybody with me? So if you want to fill something with a series of objects or lines, there's a lot of different ways to do this. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and use our Option key to make a copy of this line and use our Shift key to line them up. And then I'm going to shrink this one down quite a bit so that it kind of varies or staggers the line. So I can go from here to here. I'm going to select both. I can click, Shift, click to grab them both, or I can just make a selection that touches them both to grab them both. So 2 options there. And I'm going to go to Object, Blend, Blend Options. And I'm going to tell it that I would like it to have specified steps, and I'd like it to have 12 of these lines from this one to that one. And I'm going to click on OK. Now, that won't apply it. It just gives it a rule. And then I'm going to go to Object, Blend, Make. So now I've got a series of lines.